Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie Moab investigation, the final part, 8. Questions from body-worn camera. Prior to responding to the scene, you ask dispatch for the phone number of the reporting party. Dispatch gives you his number. While on scene, you tell Park Ranger Melissa Halls that you would love to talk with the independent witness. Before calling witness, why didn't you call the reporting party witness? I would have called. I got called to another call, and that was the next thing I would have been doing. The point where I got called away, where I would have if Robbins had not called him, or if I didn't think that he was going to. For example, if I believed that wasn't going to happen and I wasn't getting called away, then I would have called him. But by the time that it was time to call, we had spoken with Gabby, spoken with Brian, and spoken with an independent witness, and we see the physical evidence and everything was lining up. And the problem we have is by saying, okay, well, if only we had just called that first guy. Okay, well, what do we have then? We still have a guy who said he was driving by, and so I assume he's also paying attention to the car in front of him, traffic, and the red light, and this and that. So comparing that with the guy who said he saw the whole thing on foot there, and then we have Gabby's and Brian's statements, and then we actually have physical evidence. I don't think if we would have said anything, if he had repeated everything he said to dispatch to me, it does not line up with the physical evidence. It doesn't line up with another independent witness who has no reason to lie. It doesn't line up with what Brian and Gabby said. And don't forget, I told both of them what I thought was true at the time, and what I tried to use as leverage was I have two witnesses that are going to say, you hit her, so give me something. Because usually, if they can give me a little something, then I can start pulling on the sweater and unraveling. I was trying to get Brian to give me something. He didn't give me anything. I go to Gabby, and I think she's going to cover for Brian. And I said, hey, we have two independent witnesses. I said this because I thought my witness would line up with what I thought this guy told us. I thought we were going to have two. And her response was, well, I definitely hit him first. So at the end of everything, her statement was like Brian's, was like my witness. So if I had talked to the first witness, who, by the way, that's why I went to the Moonflower to talk to, that's the first place I went, I didn't know I was going to find anyone. I went there to talk to the guy. That's the first thought I had, was talk to him. I didn't know my greenie was going to find the van so quick. My point is, yeah, he should have been talked to. And I don't know if it was on video or on a text or or later. But while I had been called to another call, or before I left the scene, or sometime while it was still relevant, while they were still in town, I told, I'm not putting the blame on my trainee. It's not his fault. I said, get the reporting party's statement. I had already called witness. I already spoke to witness. I told witness we're going to get a written statement from him, and I made arrangements. I told Robbins we're going to do that. Well, I didn't understand, but I do remember watching my video after finding out that he hadn't got because I read his report. I had to approve it. So I read his report like, hey, this is a great. Where's the reporting party statement I told you to get? He said, I got it. I said, well, where is it? And he said it's right there. And he was referring to the other witness's statement. So I don't know what he told you, but that night he told me that he thought that witness was the reporting party. Now, I did watch the body cam footage at one point where I already knew he hadn't got that, and I wondered if I miscommunicated with my rookie. And so I was careful to listen for the part where and I did say to my rookie, I made it clear at least once, and probably more than once, that we had two witnesses. And I even remember that I told him, well, I watched the video when I did. I told him that witness was someone I found at the Moonflower. It was very evident that my rookie had paid attention. He should have known there was two, that these two are not one, and he was also the one at the end of everything. I'm on to the next call. He has his call up, and it shows this witness, not that witness, and a different phone number, and also I'm sure he was monitoring traffic. I did ask if we had the number for the reporting party because I wanted that information on the van. So what happened? I went to the Moonflower looking for him. I couldn't find him. I walked around and everyone acted like nothing had happened over there. I thought they had gotten into a fight at a different grocery store because no one was there. There was so many people, no one rushed up to me, and I thought I was at the wrong place. It was like if a dramatic event had went down, nobody here seemed to even register it. Like I was surprised. I was walking back to my car, and I had asked for that phone number because I couldn't find the RP. I was getting back up to my door, getting into my car after that radio traffic was when witness came and said, "Hey, are you here because of that domestic?" And that's the first time I was like, good, at least I'm at the right spot. Because I walked up and down in front of the grocery store and nobody was even concerned. No one offered to talk to me. No one seemed to care that I was there. And it was weird. For whatever it is said happened, no one, when I got there, no one seemed to even expect police would respond. It was very weird. I thought we had the wrong location. So that's why I asked for that number. I don't know if my grainy rookie, if Robbins would have heard it, because at that point, maybe he was. I don't know for sure. I couldn't tell you, the video should. He probably had eyes on the van. He was probably following the van, so he was probably trying to give information and probably not hearing that. I don't know. You'd probably have to ask him, and maybe you already did, how it came to be that he thought this is what he told me. I don't know what he told you. He thought the night that I asked about his report about not having the original caller's statement in it, he told me he thought that the guy whose name and number I gave him, that witness, was the caller. Could it have been avoided? Sure. Could I have done stuff to make sure that happened earlier? I was pretty tied up with other calls most of the night, but I'm sure I could have taken a minute. I'm sure I could have. I thought it was handled. He's new. The buck stops at the FTO, and I know that. It was not done. It should have been done. Even as I sit here and tell you, it would not have changed the outcome if I still have 3 other witnesses, physical evidence, and observations all going one way, and a guy who said he was driving by and saw something different. What I assume, even to this day, is he drove by at the time he saw bright Gabby's face, and it probably looked like if he's behind Gabby It might have looked like a slap. It might have looked like a punch. He probably saw something that looked like her head move as Brian grabbed her face. I can't know. I don't know. I never talked with the guy. I wish I should have. There's no way I can tell you this investigation should have had an end of report at the end of it without having talked to the guy who called. There's not an excuse for it. I can't explain it. I can't imagine what he could have said, especially if it was what he told dispatch. That could have changed the decision that was made. Now, maybe if we didn't have that other independent witnesses, sure, it wasn't going to be enough. Once you found out that he hadn't been contacted, you guys still have never reached out to him? There's still no statement from that witness? No, I could be wrong, and I know you could find this out. The night I approved Robin's report was either that night, or if we were too slammed because there was not an arrest made, he might have done it the next night. If it was the next night, I believe probably hadn't been contacted. The decision to not contact him was probably because the assumption that Gabby and Brian were gone out of town and would be very difficult to refund and change anything. Also, because I don't think that we felt like anything he said, especially if he just repeated to us that he saw what he saw, would have changed our decision anyway. But ultimately, at some point, I did reach out to a supervisor and ask if we should call him to get a statement from him, and it was like, the event's over. They're all gone. And the question was posed to me, Eric, would it have changed the decision you made? And I said, no, absolutely not. It wouldn't have changed what we did, because we had our observations, physical evidence, and we have 2 statements plus another independent statement, and the guy told dispatch he was just driving by. That's not going to be enough probable cause to change the outcome of that decision. Who was it that you asked about that? I think it was Chief Edge, but it was much later because it was before the media frenzy, like when Northport called. Eric said he told Chief that Northport was calling and it may be something they needed to find out. I think the chief told me to hold off on it. Would it have changed anything? Eric said based on the facts, he didn't see how the statement made to dispatch by that witness could have changed anything. Why should a statement by a guy driving by who called dispatch get more weight than the guy who said face-to-face to a cop who saw everything and was not driving by? Why is one of those statements heavier than the other? Well, maybe it's not, but then you have the physical evidence. Even if they cancel each other out, you still have the physical evidence and you still have these other statements and our observation. So no, unfortunately, this is one of those really tough things about being a cop. We don't always get it right. And even when we get it right, sometimes it looks like we got it wrong. And sometimes we got it right. But we should have done something just a little different. Sometimes you don't know that. And sometimes you never find out if you should have. We get paid really not a lot of money to really make some crappy situations turn out like to be, to the public, perfect. I'm not making excuses, but come on. Witness told you that he thought Brian and Gabby were fighting over a phone. Now, I understand from watching video, your time spent was primarily with Gabby. Do you recall if that aspect of fighting over the phone was talked about with Brian or Gabby. I made an assumption that it looked to the witness like they were fighting over a phone. I made this assumption that when Brian told us that she was hitting him with the phone in her hand, that from the perspective of that witness, that it must have looked like they were fighting over a phone because she was hitting him with the phone in her hand. I should have probably clarified with everyone what was the fight over, but from what I heard and understood, the fight was not over a phone. From Gabby's own mouth and Brian's own mouth, they were telling me the fight was, and they were telling Officer Robbins, the fight was over basically Brian not respecting their mutual space in that van and maybe some hurtful things he was saying about her attempts to make a career for herself the way she wanted to and maybe doubting it. When witness said they looked like they were maybe fighting over a phone, I already heard from both of them of what they were fighting over. And if he thinks they were fighting over a phone, maybe it's because she had a phone in her hand while she was hitting him. She had a phone in her hand. So, I guess we could have gone over those details more and try to figure out the phone thing, but it felt like Brian and Gabby were saying the same thing. They were separated immediately. Eric said they didn't have time to formulate a story. They were saying the same thing. Brian got out of the van and said, "Hey, my feet were dirty," and this and that. She said, "I just cleaned up the van and he's in there making a mess." It doesn't sound like a phone is involved. Why should a guy watching someone hit someone else with the phone say it may have been over the phone? I don't know. I guess we could have said, "Hey, was the fight over the phone?" I don't know if it would have changed. The motivation for the fight is kind of irrelevant. Like, did someone assault someone? Does someone need to go to jail? I know there's scenarios we can dream up where the reason for the fight initiating can be really important. So maybe that's something to go over. But again, how much time do you spend when you're the only person on duty? For all intents and purposes, there's only one of us on duty. I'm required to go to every call the guy is on. So how much time do you spend on a call? I worked 10 hours and I gave a tenth of my day to one couple. I have many other calls. The other calls that are going on is a guy laying in traffic, and that it's important to him that I come and drag him out of traffic. All these calls are important. If I had my way, I'd spend as much time as I needed on every call to make sure every call worked out right. But they want us quick, and we don't have the staff. I'm not blaming the department, but we don't have the staff. You explained to Officer Robbins how valuable it is to read the state code word for word. You have the statute for assault pulled up on your laptop, and you read it to Officer Robbins. An attempt with unlawful force or violence to do bodily injury to another. What website did you use to access this information? The Utah Legislature website. Did you believe at the time that you read the entire definition of assault to Officer Robbins? I believed I had, and I also believe that when I got to bodily injury, I went and looked up the state's definition of bodily injury to further expand on what the code is talking about. I hope I didn't miss a single word. Your question makes me wonder, but yeah, I thought I read him the whole statute. You explained to Officer Robbins how important words are in the code, especially in the court system. You talked about there having to be the intent to do bodily injury, and further explained that attempt is implicit with intent. You looked up the definition of bodily injury and conclude that if Gabby didn't intend to cause Brian pain, illness, or impairment of physical condition, then she didn't commit an assault as defined in the code. What is your understanding of the various culpabilities as it relates to various crimes under Utah state law: intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, and criminal negligence? Some offenses, if you're going to be found guilty, require intent, and some of them don't. I'm not a lawyer, obviously, or I wouldn't be doing this job, but generally, as officers, we go to the code book as we try to figure out if what the legislator wrote, that from the wording in there, is one of the elements of this offense intent. From my understanding, there's certain crimes you don't even have to prove intent. There are some statutes that explicitly say there doesn't have to be intent. He gave the example of a 27-year-old guy who went on a date with a girl who showed him his ID as proof that she was 18. They wound up having sex and the state doesn't care. You could even have done your due diligence to check her ID. It could have looked real. Intent doesn't matter in that crime. You're going to jail, and you're being charged with that. When you look up the code for assault, at least what I read, and if there's more that I didn't read, what I read to Robbins was an attempt with unlawful force or violence. He then goes on to explain the allegory of shooting a basketball through a hoop. It seems to me, when you use the word attempt, that intent is implicit in that. So I made the determination on the side of the road on this incident that part of an assault is intent. And that's why I gave the example earlier, bumping into someone and causing them injury. What I read led me to believe, based on my experience, that part of assaulting someone requires an intent to cause them bodily injury. If you're attempting to do this, then I see it as, and of course, there could be case law. I'm not a lawyer. There's all kinds of reasons I could be wrong. But you know, they don't require me to go to law school to be a cop. You're required to have a high school diploma or a GED and fog up a mirror. So, what I read tells me, before they train you and everything else, that code to me said, the way I read it, she had to have some intention to be guilty of the assault. And of course, domestic violence is not an offense. Domestic violence is an enhancement on the crime of assault. So, first thing, assault. Then we can figure out if they're domestic partners and see if it needs to be enhanced. I walked away from that, and I feel to this day, Gabby didn't. I take her at her word. She did not. It was not her intention. It was not her intent. It may have been the result, but it wasn't her. It wasn't the motivating fact behind her movements. And so that's why I say, hey, I don't think we have an assault here. Pushing an envelope, sure. Writing an edge, for real, yeah. At the time, and still today, you consider attempt and intent to be synonymous? I don't know. They're different words. I'll give you that. But I don't, to this day, I still believe that if you attempt to do something, there must be implicit in that intent. Now, if someone tells me I'm wrong in that, or they show me the case law, or they got the lawyer that says that they're not, of course, if that were to come to my attention, I would adjust my future interactions because I have to follow up. I understand that. What is the culpability required for the crime of assault? My understanding is, to commit the crime of assault, you have to have intention, and you have to have bodily injury, and it has to be unlawful. You have to unlawful force of violence. Those are the elements. So I need all of them. I need the attempt. I need it to be unlawful, force or violence used, and then I need the result to be bodily injury. And I think I need all three of those. I thought that then, and I think that now. One of the reasons I don't get bored in this job is I learn stuff new every day. Usually it's in court when a defense attorney schools me. Sometimes it's situations like this. At this time, I explained to Officer Pratt the 4 culpabilities and their levels. I also read Officer Pratt the assault code in full. That does not change things. I'm not going to say I haven't read the assault code many times throughout my career. And I'm sure I read that before. You know, the second part, it has to be addressed. I would have to actually take time to read it and digest it, like I did on the side of the road with the first part that I read, and probably I got sidetracked with bodily injury and went off to read that definition and neglected to scroll down. And if I did, that's a mistake. And it may have changed our decisions, but I can't say that even here now until I read it and I really think about it for a few minutes, because I do take the act of putting people in handcuffs and taking their freedom and giving them charges very seriously. And I usually spend a little bit of time reading up on it first and then trying to figure out if it's going to fly. So yes, that second part you said, I would admit that could have changed what we decided to do, but I would still have to look it over and think about it. You told Assistant Chief Palmer that you were going to go reread the statute and just see if it fits or if there's a way it doesn't fit. After this, you determined that the assault didn't occur depending on Gabby's intent. You tell Officer Robbins that how Gabby answers the question will seal her fate. Some may say you deliberately coached Gabby into your questioning regarding intent that would allow the investigating officer to avoid making an arrest, either by citation or custody. Do you recall the manner in which you questioned Gabby? If I recall, I told her to not answer quickly and to think about it, and it was important and it would determine what would happen next. I think that's a fair thing to tell somebody. I think that's a very fair thing to tell them. And some would say that's coaching, but that's assuming that a 22-year-old girl knew what answer I wanted her to give me. I don't recall trying to get her to tell me one way or another. I do recall telling her to think about it because it's important, and I think that's a fair thing to tell somebody. Well, did you deliberately coach Gabby in her responses to your questions regarding intent? No. I had no idea what she was going to say. I hoped, so I ran K9 for a while. And when I was running K9, one of the things they taught us was you could cue your dogs and you don't know you're doing it, because dogs will pick up on stuff that you do right before they find something every time, because they read your body language really, really well, because that's what animals do. I'll be honest with you. You know, as you put it that way, this is the first time it's entered my mind that maybe something I said coached her. And I could see why people might think that. I truly did not know what she was going to say next. I was afraid that she was going to say something that was going to make her go to jail. I didn't want her to go to jail, but I would have taken her to jail if she had said the other thing. And I don't consider giving someone fair warning to think about their answer because it's an important question to be coaching. Some people could see it that way, I guess. I don't think at the time that I was coaching her at all. But I still think it's important that she understands, not just to shoot an answer out. I think she should think about it. If I'm asking her questions, I want an honest answer. She needs to think about her motives. Most people don't know themselves that well, especially that young. And I want her to think, what was your motivation? Like, why? That's why I repeated it like 3 times. I wanted her to tell me, like for real, what it was. And I think she gave me a really honest answer. I think she gave me an honest answer. And I don't know how honest her answer would have been if I hadn't had her prepare herself for that question. Maybe I coached her into giving me an honest answer because that's what I was wanting. That's what I wanted, and honestly, that's haunted me. Her saying, I just wanted him to stop telling me to calm down. She's little. I have daughters. I can imagine them in these situations. I totally see one of my daughters just wanting someone to stop telling them to calm down. I believe what she said. I believed it then and I still do. So hopefully the coaching I gave her was coaching to do some real self-reflection and give me the truth. And how could she know what answer I wanted from her? I don't know. Maybe it was that easy for her. Maybe I gave it to her that easy. I don't know. That's not what I was trying to do. I can tell you that. I think she gave me an honest answer. If she had given me an answer that I didn't think was honest, I would have said no. I just really believed her. I really believed her. At this point, I pointed out that he did just that when he blamed the backpack for causing her injuries. He pointed out there were witnesses that saw Brian hit her. The biggest problem with that backpack thing that didn't get addressed in that video is the mark on her arm was bruised. It's not from that day. It was clearly prior. It wasn't involved in this incident. And the thing about her face is I don't know if you can see it on body cam, the scratch to her face. The fingernail scratch was not significant. It wasn't deep. It was completely consistent with someone grabbing someone's face, and if they hadn't cut their nails, then you can have that little scruff. I truly don't think that in a day that you would still see it. I don't think so. Maybe 2 days, whatever. But the bruise, had it been like a fresh thing, we might have to push that a little more. But whatever lie that he or she or anyone says about to protect Brian or whatever, the bruise was not from that day. It was days ago. In speaking with Officer Robbins regarding what to do, you tell Officer Robbins that you support him in whatever decision he makes, even if they go as far as taking her to jail. If you didn't believe the incident rose to the level of assault based on how you interpreted Utah State Code, why would you be okay with and support Officer Robbins if he decided to take her to jail? Because it wasn't my job to make that decision. He was FTO Stage 3, last few weeks of his training. My job was to go there and make sure I observe what he's going to do. Be there as a resource for him and he's supposed to be free to make his decisions at that point, as long as it's not something like absurd, like taking Brian to jail would have been absurd. I'm sorry, unless there are laws for being a shitty boyfriend and gaslighting and taking advantage of people mentally and emotionally for your own reasons, which there's no law against it. So yes, I would have intervened at a point where maybe, I'll give him credit. Maybe he could have convinced me that whatever happened back there rose to some kind of disorderly conduct, and maybe Brian needed a ticket for that. But that's an infraction, so it's still not going to land him in jail. Even if we say, hey, I think it's important for Brian to get a citation too, he could have talked me into it, sure. I don't think he has enough time and experience to go to these places yet. That's fine, but it wasn't like I was hell-bent on not charging Brian. I would have loved to. I saw him as a problem, I really did. But just because I don't call him out and amp him up, that's not my job. I'm supposed to de-escalate. I'm not going to say, hey man, you think it's cute saying crisscross applesauce? It's not my job to rile him up, to get him all wound up and turn him loose to the world. That's not my job. I'm not 22. I'm 39. I've dealt with people like this my whole career. I used to work at the prison for 3 years. I know these kinds of guys. Brian didn't get away with anything for being cute, and Brian showed more red flags than a Chinese communist rally going on. That he was a shitty boyfriend. I couldn't charge him. The fingernail thing, the way it was described by witness and Gabby, even if I didn't clarify it with him, that's not something I can arrest him for unless I lie on my PC statement or omit important facts. The only person I could arrest was Gabby. And the reason to answer your question on why I support you in whatever you do is because it's not my decision at that point in his training. I'm supposed to let him decide, and in the end of my shift, I go and write a report about what I think of his decision. That's the full effect that I'm supposed to have on him at that point, is to go write, I disagreed or agreed or whatever, as long as whatever he did wasn't insane. That's where he's at in FTO. He's supposed to make the decisions. That's where he was, and my job is to show up and be a resource and let him bounce things off of me and be present. And I didn't like that I had to even leave him. If you don't feel like the assault meets the code, and if he were to take her to jail, you would be supportive of that? And if you felt like that was violating her rights, you would have stopped that? Officer Pratt brought up the prior scenario he talked about, sending 100 cops to a call and 80 of them making one decision, while the 20 made a different decision. He brought up again pushing the envelope and comparing the scenario as being on a razor's edge, and in this type of situation, you have to accept that some people might not see things the same way you do. The world can think whatever they want about policing. This is a gray area sometimes, and you have to live in a gray area. I wouldn't have done what Officer so-and-so did, but I can see why he did it. That guy might have arrested someone, and you didn't agree with it, and it goes to court, and the judge and jury and everyone agreed with that officer and found him guilty, and you still can disagree. In some cases, you could have arrested the other guy and convince a judge and jury to go with you on your side. Well, who was right? Well, it's not that easy, and I accept that. So, would I feel right about arresting Gabby? No, not at all. Could I see other cops arresting her? Sure. Could I see other ones not arresting her? Sure. I have to be grown up enough to say I don't always get what I want, and in this case, I would support my trainee in disagreeing with me and making an opposite call because I think it could have been substantiated. Sure, I think he could have totally written his report and substantiated his decisions, so how could I not support him? What I can support is another officer making a different decision than me and then substantiating it well enough to have done what they did that I don't agree with. What I can't support is if they do something that cannot be backed or substantiated. If he chose to arrest her, he could totally justify that, sure. Would I have done it? No. And I hope that my report makes it clear why, but, obviously, it's not like I wrote a report believing that it was going to be an international uproar, or I probably would have made it 5, 10, 15, maybe I would have made a book out of it, the report, because your supervisor says, hey, don't write a novel on these things, man. Maybe something like this, sometimes it should have been. Clearly, there's a lot of questions about what happened that my report didn't explain, or we wouldn't even be. You wouldn't be like, hey, tell Pratt he doesn't need to come in. I read the report. All questions are answered. You know what I mean? You told Officer Robbins to go full or nothing, or somewhere in between and separate them. You further kind of give them a nod, the wink, like, hey, stay separated, it's up to you. What did you mean by that in this statement? I told him to tell her that? I told Robbins to tell Gabby and Brian to give them a wink and stay separated? Was I telling him to tell them it's up to them? Or was I telling him it's up to him? Because I don't remember this. I could see myself telling him that it's up to him, but I cannot see myself telling him to go tell people they have to separate, like, hey, you guys, you really don't have to. Now, I can see me telling him he can frame it. Here's the real problem. We touched on this. If you're not charging somebody, you don't have authority by law to separate them. So, if this is a domestic assault, we have to go all the way, and you have to separate them, and you have to charge them. One of them, if you're doing that, then you have to. If you're doing nothing, like you're not charging anybody, but you're seeing them, what Robbins needs to understand is that's not like something that we can enforce. However, if he can tell that they're not going to separate and it's important to him that they separate, at that point, I would have charged Gabby. If I got the impression that the separation wasn't going to work, like from the get-go, that this is bullshit, they are not going to separate, I would have arrested Gabby for sure. They needed to be separated. They had to. I can't imagine I was giving him permission to tell them they don't have to, but if he says it, I'm amazed I'll go watch it. But I may have told him, hey, it's up to him, like how you handle it, whether you, separate them or don't separate them. Well, I don't think not separating them was ever on the table. But whether you charge them or don't charge them, if you charge a domestic assault, you have to do a no contact order. That's it. If you decide it's a domestic assault, you have to separate them. If I say that maybe I could give some insight into it. I'm racking my brain to imagine that I'd ever tell Robbins that he could tell them they don't really have to separate. Maybe it was because Gabby was so upset about separating, and I didn't feel that she was a threat to Brian's safety at all. At this point, I pulled up the video so Officer Pratt could observe his statements. I can't go back in my mind and tell you what I was thinking there, but I can tell you this. I did not believe for a second that Gabby was a threat to Brian's safety. And I think, obviously, history now shows he was a threat to her safety. If the more vulnerable, weaker person was the one at threat, like Brian would beat Gabby, or I was afraid Brian was going to beat Gabby that night, it is important. No, my mindset at the time was she could hit him all she wants. If he doesn't have enough sense, look, if he doesn't want to get hit by his girlfriend and he doesn't have the sense to take the separation as time not to get hit by her, he's a grown-ass man. She's not a real physical threat to him. And now we can see that clearly opposite. I thought he was an emotional threat to her. I thought he was a mental threat to her. I didn't know he was a physical threat to her. I really didn't. I thought as much as she might hit him or slap him. There's only so much 105, 110 pounds can do to a guy who's 165 or whatever, 5 inches taller. She doesn't have the physical strength to be a threat to him based on my observations that day. It's not like there was a gun or a knife involved or something where I thought she was going to be a threat to him. It's like, what is it to him if Brian decides to, behind our backs, go reunite with the girl who slapped him? She's not a threat to him. So why should we, other grown men, care so much if he's not got the sense to stay away? Now, when I said give the wink or the nod, I'm only speculating because I don't know what I was thinking, but it's either like, hey, you can go pick up your girlfriend because she's not a threat to you, but you can't say that. You can't tell them you can. You know, the truth is you can't tell him he can't. It's not illegal. If you're not charging her, then you don't have a lawful right to issue a no contact. So if you want to say it in a way that makes it kind of obvious that you two can get out of here because she's not going to be able to hurt him, that's the only thing I can think of. But I definitely can't get back in my mind from 2 months ago now and tell you exactly what was going through my mind. I might have been thinking more about the next call I'm going on, just trying to get out of there at that point. But I don't like what I said. No, I definitely don't like it. I definitely think that the mindset I was in based on that whole conversation I saw was just reminding him and myself and everyone there, if they end up back together, she's not going to hurt him. It's not like a dude hurting a woman, like what we know happened later. But I must add, more than half a month later. Without the ability to have hindsight, Brian just seemed like this really, I hate to say it now, it's going to sound horrible, but he seemed like a mental and emotional bully. He just didn't seem like a physical. He didn't seem physical. He didn't. And I clearly missed a huge red flag. If that was a big red flag this whole world could see, if he hadn't killed her and they released this body cam to the world and said, what do you think of Officer Pratt's decision? I wonder what they would be saying. I wonder if it would be like, clearly he was going to kill her soon, or if they would say, he's a mama's boy and she should have gone to jail. I mean, we're all doing this with like the fact in our mind that we know what happened later. So it's really convoluted and hard to tell you like anything other than what I thought at the time, which was, if I missed a big red flag that he was a murderer, then yes, I missed it. I didn't feel like she was a threat to him, and I didn't care if he ended up with a girl that was slapping him, because I didn't feel like she was a threat by him. I guess I missed that one. It was one red flag that I did miss that was there, that he was going to murder her. For sure, I missed that one. Or I could tell you, if I would have known he was going to murder her, I would have taken vacation to follow them, because I care about people to the point where he was going to murder. And I would have intervened, and citizens arrested him in Wyoming. I would have taken my own time. I would have missed my own family to go do that. I'm desperately fucked over that she got killed. I really am. I would have done anything to stop it if I would have known that was coming. That time right there, I can tell you, I thought it was silly that anyone would take her seriously as a threat to him, and we need to protect him. And turns out I was right about that. I just didn't see him as the threat that he ended up being. I saw him as an emotional guy, an emotional, mental threat to her. I didn't see him. I thought he was like a mama's boy. Maybe he was a mama's boy. He went home to mama. Maybe he was a mama's boy. Maybe I'm right about that. But I didn't know he was. I didn't think that guy had it in him. I mean, he wouldn't even take a plastic water bottle. He's drinking out of, I didn't know, but later I learned he's drinking out of melons. That he did pull over on me. I did not know he was going. Do we even know at that time if he knew he was going to murder her? Did he even know? I mean, who knew? That sounds like an awful excuse for what I said, but that's all I can come up with for what I just watched. Did you ever see any photos that Officer Robbins took? No, I didn't see them. I don't think I ever saw them. If I did, it would have been on after he uploaded them. It should be on the audit log. I don't recall looking at them. I might have. I told him there are no photos, and that was one of the issues. Officer Pratt asked, "There's no footage of him taking pictures?" And I replied and say, "There is footage of Officer Robbins taking pictures, but the pictures were never uploaded and they are now gone." Officer Robbins stated that he doesn't know anything about that, but did state that he had a similar issue a couple of months prior where he took a bunch of photos on his work phone, and he said he used the software that's approved that is on the work phone to take photos. The software is from Taser, and he said he took video from video surveillance on his work phone and met with one of the people involved in the case. It was a hit and run, and pulled it up on his work phone to show the individual, and the video was gone. He stated he had body cam footage of him recording the video on his work phone, and it just disappeared. He said it's only happened once, and it was around the same time that this incident took place. He said he knew he recorded video, and he used the software he is supposed to use to upload the videos and photos, and a couple of hours later, he met with the individual to show him the video, and it was gone. He can't explain it and doesn't know if it's a software issue or a bug that happened, but there's proof he took it and proof of him trying to pull it up and it was gone. Officer Pratt called Assistant Chief Palmer and gave a brief synopsis of what happened and said he told Gabby there was nothing he could do as it was all written in statute. Officer Pratt, the last thing I can do is call a supervisor where this is such a minor. This was like a slap bite and injuries from like a fingernail. I just don't know if it's worth the whole domestic thing or not. If it's going to get us in trouble if we don't do it this way. Yeah, I do remember. I think he's a good supervisor for the way he answered. From what I recall, he pretty much reflects what I responded to. He was like, listen, either it's domestic, you do the whole thing, or it's not domestic and it's not. But I think he was basically saying, I'm not there and I don't have all the facts you have. That's what you're there doing. So if it's domestic, do it domestic. And if it's not, then don't. And I think that's pretty much where he left it, which it sounds like really solid sound advice. Is there anything else you would think is important to add, or add anything I haven't asked about? I've spent a lot of time going long on answers and kind of wandering into territory that I guess helpful or not answered some other questions, or maybe it was too much to say, but anyone who hears the results of this case, your investigation, whether it goes the way one way or it goes another way, that there's always going to be some people that are unhappy with it, and that's a tough position for you to be in. I know, I don't know you, but I'm very comfortable based on these were tough questions. They were tough questions. I had to think a lot, and some of them I wasn't ready for, and I actually can't even tell you that I know what I meant. Like, for the video back here, I know I envy the position you're in. I thank you for doing it. Whatever you decide, whatever your findings are, I can tell from just the time, the things, and the questions you've come up with that you're intelligent, you're smart, and you're going to do what you think is right, and I accept it 100%. One thing that I want to know, and anyone else who gets the findings to know, is I would do anything to change the fact that Brian killed Gabby. I'd do anything I could. I really would. I accept that if something wasn't done right, I accept it. And if it resulted in, even if it wouldn't have changed the outcome, but it wasn't done right, or even if it would have, I don't think anyone can know that, and I accept it. I want anyone involved in this case or reading a transcript down the line or hearing this, or whoever, a parent or anyone, I'm not skirting this. It is what it is. I accept responsibility for it, but I don't want anyone to think that I did not care. I have daughters, and I do want anyone involved to know that I talked to Gabby, and I treated Gabby as much as like I could fatherly, the way I would want another cop to interact with my daughter. Even if he got it wrong, I do care. I am devastated about it, and I'm sorry if the wrong decision was made, and I'm not trying to defend myself in saying this, I don't believe it would have done anything to change her murder, except for Brian making the choice not to murder her. But that's Brian's responsibility. My responsibility is that I do what I'm supposed to do. And just like Brian needed to take his responsibility, I'll take my responsibility with whatever the findings are. I accept it. But don't let anyone think I didn't care. It's been I don't even want to complain because, she's dead. Her parents are suffering forever. I'm tiny in all of this. But it is really tough. And I cared that day and I still care. That's what I wanted everyone to know is I do care. And I don't know how this is going to end for me. Like, I'm not talking about my job. Like emotionally. It's not easy. And I don't think the public gets that. I don't know if they know we care. I don't know if they know. It sucks. It's more of a comment than anything else. Just so you know, man. And that is the end of the Moab Investigative Report. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing and giving us a thumbs up or even a thumbs down if you feel so inclined. And until next time, this is UnJustified.